Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome back to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. I'm so excited that you're here. This is the Kirby Puckett episode of the Grow Podcast.
The Kirby Puckett episode. You're going to have to
34.
explain that for most of us.
Episode 34, my favorite athlete of all time. My number, because it was Kirby Puckett's number 34. Been waiting for this one. We're going to break down his career stats, his MVP season, hit 356. Break down the sad end to his career with the
so
injury.
We're changing the entire trajectory of the podcast.
Yeah,
we're turning into a sports podcast instead of a
just for
your faith next step
I want
podcast.
To grow your knowledge about my favorite baseball player of all time.
Awesome. I'll just take a nap.
Is that No, that is not what we are on, but thank you all for being here. My name is David. I have Pastor Mike with me like I always do. We're excited to have you here. Quick before we dive in, if you haven't yet, I want to encourage you to subscribe. That way you'll know when the new podcast goes up. You'll get an alert. Make sure you turn your notifications on as well. But our new episodes go up on Monday mornings, 6 a.m. Is that right, producer guy? Yes, 6 a.m. So I know
Central
everybody.
Time.
That's true. Central time. So I'm sure everybody sets their alarms for 6:01 Central Time to make sure that they check out I having a conversation. Yeah. But we made it to our second week of our new series, Bless This Mess. And this weekend, would you like to tell everybody what, hopefully all of you have joined us. If you haven't yet, maybe pause this, go watch the message from Sunday.
The official title of the message was one we actually couldn't use in Facebook and things because we were afraid that it would be censored. It's not PG-13. It's just, they don't, it flags all kinds of things. We called it Mythical Sex Causes Messes.
Yes.
Which brings up all kinds of interesting questions for people.
And it was not about the reproduction rates of dragons and unicorns, which is what I thought when I saw the title.
This. Yeah.
And I was pretty excited for it, but it ended up being a very good message, even though it wasn't about that. So,
well, you sound surprised.
Yes, it was. And do you want to give the same kind of warning we gave on Sunday for this podcast?
Yeah, although this probably won't be
not as much.
quite as intense, but on Sunday I talked about the fact that for those probably younger than middle school, I encourage them to be part of our New Hope Kids. To join in New Hope Kids online. This is not designed for them.
Yeah.
Not that you don't have these kinds of conversations, but we want to make sure there's age-appropriate conversations with that. And if we have time, we'll even talk about maybe how to have some of those age-appropriate conversations. If not, we'll save that for another time. But we've got it all planned out, but sometimes we get off track.
I hope we get to that, as I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old that I am terrified about one day having those conversations. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about sex today on the Grow Podcast. And you talked this weekend about how
you've been so nervous about this one.
I'm not nervous about it at all. Okay. No, it was. We had some fun during our host moments.
For New Hope
New Hope here, but no, I'm not nervous about it at all.
Okay, you just keep looking at me like I'm not sure where we're going here.
Well, I'm never sure where we're going. Again, I thought we were going to talk about Kirby Puckett for 45 minutes. So, no, you talked about how sex was God's idea, and it kind of mirrors creation, and it made us a part of creation, and he thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, it was his idea in the first place. And I think sometimes we forget that, or somehow we think, okay, it was his idea, but it's somehow something that shouldn't be talked about, or it's somehow a bad thing.
Well, why did it become such a big deal then, and something that causes such a mess for so many of us?
Well, there's a lot of different directions we can go there, but so let's talk about why it is a big deal, because it's one of the most talked about things on a planet. Let's be honest. It really is. It's powerful. It creates all kinds of emotions. It messes up or enhances relationships. But one of the things we have to remember is sex is one of the primary ways, if not at the top of the list, that God designed for us to experience the intimacy, the relationship, the joy, and the creativity, the creation that is God. In theological circles, there's kind of a theological term, imago Dei, and I think it's originally from Latin. That it's the theological kind of teaching that, remember, we're made in the image of God. And this is, some people might struggle with this, but sex is one of the things that reflects the image of God in incredible ways. We have to remember God is relationship. We've talked about that on the podcast before. We talk about it on the weekends around here. He is Trinity, although that isn't a biblical word. It's the word we use to describe God as three persons, and yet he's one. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. There is no closer relationship anywhere in time, eternity, universe. He is absolutely one. And so he's community within himself. So we've got to remember that. And he made us in his image to exist in close relationship. We have to remember God is creative. All we have to do is turn to Genesis chapter 1.
Sure.
God loves to create. He created life. So we think about that and think about what sex is. Sex is as close to both of those things as we can get as human beings, in a matter of speaking. It's designed to reveal and to bring a couple closer than anything else. And just biologically, we understand this. I was just, before we came in here, I looked up a couple of old studies. A study that UCLA did years ago that doesn't get as much publicity as I wish it would, because they discovered that there are chemicals, as we know, there's all kinds of chemicals released, like dopamine and oxytocin and our parasympathetic nervous system and serotonin. All these kinds of things are released in sex. But there's a chemical that's released that actually binds you. Part of it is oxytocin. It's for women, it's the same chemical released in the child and the woman when a woman breastfeeds. And it connects. It actually literally connects to people in ways that cannot be unconnected. That's why when after a couple has been physically intimate and then they break up, it is so devastating because we're literally connected. And God designed it biologically for that. He designed it emotionally for that. He designed it spiritually to tie us together. The Bible talks about this. Ephesians 5 is one of the places the Bible talks about marriage and the relationship between a man and a woman. It talks about it as mysterious, but it says this is an example of what the church's relationship or our relationship with God is supposed to be like. But part of that, too, is it takes work. It takes intentionality, which is another discussion. But the act of sex is about community. It's about relationship. It's about physical intimacy at the deepest, most personal level. So it's powerful. Let me just say it's powerful because it was designed to reveal intimacy and relationship. Therefore, the reason it messes us up is because it's the primary way God designed for us to experience, in very tangible as well as spiritual and emotional ways, to experience our closeness and intimacy. It's the first thing that the enemy's going to twist. It's the first thing that sin messed up. When we talked about the first week of this series about distrust and blame and all the things, the closeness of every relationship is that between a man and woman who are married is found in sex. That was the first thing that was messed up. But we have to remember, sex is not the problem. And its power is not because of sin. It was designed by God to be powerful. And it was probably more powerful before sin entered the world. So part of that, to answer your question, why is it so powerful? I went through a lot of stuff there. God designed it to be powerful. And so we need to think of it, and this is to answer your second part of your question of why does it mess things up so much? It's because the enemy has taken the thing, probably the most powerful thing that God created, and twisted it. So it's designed to remind us of intimacy. It also, we're made in his image. There's creation that happens in it. It's where we get to participate in bringing about creation. In having children, in giving life. So the enemy twists this But we need to think of it not as a tool used by the enemy, although he certainly can, but as an ally that has been taken captive by the enemy. And so we need to restore this, and we need to talk about it in right ways.
What if I'm someone who, is trying to treat sex as God intended? So just between a man and a wife, and but I'm not married. So do I just like I have people in my life that have never been married.
Yeah.
Do they just miss out on this?
Yeah.
You just said it's one of the most powerful things God created. So that, they're just out of luck.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I think the Bible answers it. Paul answers it in 1 Corinthians 7. Actually, he was even talking about himself. He said it's in verse 9. He said it's good for those who are unmarried to stay that way. And there's been a lot of single people who are saying, "Why is that in the Bible?" But he goes on to explain. Kind of, if I can summarize it, he said, if you can choose to. If a person cannot let themselves be controlled by the need for being married. In other words, if I say, I don't feel like I have to be married. I have to be with someone. I have to be physically intimate. Said it can actually, your relationship with the Lord can be just as powerful, if not more powerful. He goes on to say, sometimes marriage, especially now in the sin-filled world, can actually distract you. So let me bring it down this way. He's basically saying you aren't less of a person because you're single. In fact, if you go about seeking your identity in Jesus, you could actually have a more powerful relationship with Jesus in many ways. But part of it depends on his design and his plan for you. Because he goes on to say, some of you just need to get married. And he's just real blunt about it. Some of you just need to get married. This is going to be a distraction for you.
Sure.
And I know there's some that's like, okay, I need to get married. Just be careful with that. Because remember, if you can't be happy single, and if you can't pursue God well while you're single, it's not going to get easier married.
Yeah.
If you're an unhappy person single, you will be an unhappy married person.
Why do we feel like sex isn't something that's talked about often in the church? And even just for a lot of people, saying the word sex in a church is extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, I know there were people this last week, and it's like, to hear that out of the pastor's mouth, pastor should never say that word.
Yeah.
And yet the Bible talks about it. Mm-hmm. Now it may not use that word, but it uses other words. And I think...
And you said earlier, too, not just talked about it, but you specifically said earlier talking about it well
in church, and
talking about it well, not just mentioning it.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons is because it's been abused.
Yeah,
I don't think churches talked about it well. I think one of the things we go back to is for years, and in the Middle Ages, for some reason, came out of this, and particularly then later the Victorian era. It's like this is a hidden thing. We don't talk about this publicly, so therefore it's a bad thing. We saw sex as the problem. Mm-hmm. Instead of an ally that's been taken captive. And all of that goes back to what we talked about the first week. The very first thing that was messed up when sin entered was what? Our relational world. Distrust, blame, it takes intentionality, there's pain, and so... Shame is involved in this. And so what's going to be the most infected is by all of that stuff. It's going to be the most powerful part of that. And so, it comes out of the fact that I think, particularly out of the Victorian era, that it somehow was turned into a bad thing. It goes back to, sin messed things up. I think some of it is just simple immaturity.
Sure.
Some people never quite get beyond middle school humor, kind of thing.
Like our producer.
Yeah. But here's the big thing, and I've been thinking about this. I was going to comment on that, but we'll let that one go. I've been thinking about this. I think the big reason that we struggle with talking about it publicly is because God designed it not to be a public thing, not to not be talked about publicly. But the act is designed to be intimate between a man and a woman, therefore not to be on display to the world. So for me to talk about what happens between me and my wife feels wrong because it was not meant to be shared with anybody else.
Yeah.
And so it's not appropriate for us to put our sex lives on display. Intimacy, by definition, is intimacy. I mean, it's just what it is. It's not meant to be shared. And because the relational separation that we feel because of sin, we struggle then being entirely open even with the person that we're supposed to be intimate with. So you get this thing. It's powerful. It's designed by God to be intimate. Mm-hmm. And then we have all of this shame and all of this stuff that adds to it. And so all of this stuff just messes up our perception, messes up our idea. And so we either talk about it inappropriately or we say we aren't going to talk about it at all.
Yeah.
It turns into locker room talk that is probably inappropriate, that should only be kept between man and woman, or we're just not going to talk about it. And because it was designed to be intimate, what does the enemy do? He makes it public. He takes it public and he perverts it. Mm-hmm. What is pornography? Pornography is taking something that was meant to be intimate and perverting it publicly.
Yeah.
And all of that happens. But here's where I want to land on this. The fact that it was designed to be intimate doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. It just means that what happens between my wife and I is not meant to be shared publicly. We keep the intimacy of the relationship intimate. But we can and should openly talk about how God designed it and how he designed it to work best. So let's go back to Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5 talks about, compares marriage, and I think it is implying sex as the example of how we begin to experience our connection with the Imago Dei and live out the fact that we're in the image of God. But our relationship with God takes intentionality. It takes growing and understanding of one another. And anyone who really wants a healthy sex life, it takes understanding. Mm-hmm. It takes growing in understanding of one another and I don't know why God did this. I don't think it's a result of sin, but he wired men and women differently when it comes to sex. And we've all heard the stuff. We probably all read the books, or at least heard people talk about them, how with us as guys, we're more microwaves, we're excited about it, and no matter what, and it's okay to talk about that. And for women, it's much slower. They're more crock pots, and there's somebody said sex starts in the kitchen because it's much more about the relationship. Whereas with us as guys, we kind of think of that's how the relationship gets better. So we come at it from two completely different angles. I think God designed it that way so that we have to work at it. Mm-hmm. It's so much fun when I do premarital counseling with couples, especially young couples. And there's a book that I have them read that I would recommend for all of our readers. It's a book, I need to look up the author, Kevin Lehman. I always need to look up the author. It's called Sheet Music. And Kevin has written actually several phenomenal books that I think every Christian married couple, non-Christian married couples, you should have these. And there's several other books, but this is one of the best. Several counselor friends of mine, they recommend this too. He just talks about sex like it is. But I have couples in premarital preparation go through this, and it's so much fun for Kylie and I because they're embarrassed to talk about this, especially with the pastor, because the pastor never does anything like this, and then they'll read it and they all look at me like, oh yeah, we get it. We know how this is going to work. And I'm thinking, Kylie and I will talk to each other. You don't have a clue. You think you do. Yep. But this is going to take work. This is going to take health. This is going to take discovery and time and intentionality. Gee, mm-hmm. That sounds like a relationship. Yeah. And done well, it can enhance the relationship mm-hmm. in incredible ways.
We'll put the link to that. What did you say the name of the book was again?
Sheet Music.
Sheet Music. We'll have a link to that in the.
And by the way, I wouldn't just recommend
podcast notes
for married couples.
I was going to ask, is that something a single person should read?
I think singles can as well, to help them understand why it's so meaningful, why it's so powerful, what's going on with their own bodies, because a lot of times we don't understand that, mm-hmm. And even how to walk through this as a single and work mm-hmm. through this. And Kevin deals with that directly.
I think we have some time, and you promised you're going to teach me how to talk to my children about sex. So you're going to do that now, and I'm going to take copious notes.
Okay. There's really, a couple of big things that I had someone teach me years ago that were powerful with our kids. One,
Does it involve tricking them? Because
No.
my father, when he decided to have the big sex talk with me, told me, "Hey, son, great news. We're going to go to the Vikings training camp for the first time ever. We're going to go down to Mankato, just you and me, stay in a hotel, eat some pizza, watch the Vikings practice for a few days." And I was real excited. And then we got to the hotel room before we ever even went to training camp. And he was like, "All right." I had an ulterior motive. I was like, "What?"
Yeah, my boys could tell you too if they were here of. Now they knew it was coming, so it wasn't a kind of a bait and switch. But when they turned 13, they get to choose a location for them to go on a 5-day vacation just with me. And most time for us, for both boys, it was a hiking vacation, so we're out in nature. And one of the hikes, this is what we talk about. And both of them say, it kind of traumatized me a little bit.
I did appreciate my dad, as far as I remember at least. It was the first thing that happened on the trip. It was just, let's get it over with. Because for me, it wouldn't have mattered, but I'm sure it would have hung over his head. So he's like, we're getting it out of the way so we can go watch the Vikings.
But here's the mistake, and here's where I would encourage parents. I think one of the mistakes is we wait until some event to talk about it. I think you talk to kids appropriately about sexuality along the way. Now, it's not like with the 2-year-old, you say, "All right, now let's," but we don't talk inappropriately, and we don't turn it into something it's not. So one of the mistakes that I watch parents do is they'll use immature terms. For parts of the body and things, and it reduces it. You don't hide it. And when kids ask, like, why am I different, than different things, you talk about that openly, but you don't answer more than what they're asking.
Sure. Okay.
So even Leighton is
4, he'll be 5 in July. Yeah.
There might be some question that he asked. Answer the question that he's asking, and most of the time that's all they want. And I've watched. In fact, I've been with parents where some child will ask a question, and they kind of launch into it. Maybe they're under pressure because the pastor is there, and the kid's looking like, I didn't need to know all that. There's actually some great resources that I'll give you to put in that are they're children's books written by Christians that are age appropriate. And it sounds weird, but just good reading for each age. So, I mean, even as young as like 2 and 3, and then 4 and 5, all the way up. That's just, and they're good reading for your kids, and they help you realize this is what they need to know at this age.
Yeah.
So it takes the trauma away once they hit 13, 14, 15. And by the way, one of the things I'm discovering these days, 13 is too late.
Yeah.
The average sexual encounter of some kind, and this is sad, is perverted these days for kids is coming before they hit middle school. It's coming in 5th and 6th grade. And I know as a parent that's frightening and that's scary. And that's part of why it's so important to talk about appropriately sooner. And part of that is even to talk about what's appropriate touch, what's not appropriate touch.
Right.
So talk about it appropriately, answer their questions.
That part's interesting to me. Just the culture obviously has perverted all of this. However, the one similarity from what you're talking about and what we're seeing in kind of our more modern culture is having more conversations about sex and sexuality with children at younger ages, so that it isn't this taboo, awful thing that they think is bad or they think is wrong. The problem is in our culture, those conversations aren't designed to come with a biblical perspective, how God views it. But the idea that these conversations need to happen, with younger children is happening in the secular world as well.
And I think, and this is another one of the keys, they will take their cue on their openness with you based on how you react when they ask questions or bring it up. If you act embarrassed, they're going to be embarrassed and they aren't going to bring it up with you. Or if you get angry that someone else talked to them about it, then they're going to, I'm never going to bring that up.
That's not something I can talk to mom and dad about.
And if you talk about it, at a different level. Or if they don't, and this is the key, if they never see physical affection, now I'm not talking about inappropriate affection, but if they don't see mom and dad hug and kiss,
Yep.
and then they're like, okay, mom and dad never do that.
Yep.
So you need to practice physical affection. And as they get older, even though it embarrasses, I think it's good to embarrass them once in a while,
I'm always in favor of that. Yeah.
And grab your wife, your husband, and pull them close and embarrass them a little bit when it's just, family. And they'll go get a room. Okay, we've got one. And I think that's okay.
My dad, I'm going to embarrass you here, maybe Dad, probably not. He gave my mom a card. I was an adult by this point, and I think it was for her birthday, maybe it was Christmas, and I don't know, he called her some romantic-y nickname or whatever, and so I just jokingly gave him a gross dad, and he just looked at me and he said, "I'm 60, not dead." And I was like, "Okay, you have succeeded in embarrassing me, Father.
Yeah.
Well done." Even as an adult.
We had one time, Kylie and I, we were in church, and it was before service was started. She was working with the worship team or whatever. She stepped off the stage, and she walked by me, and I just reached over and I patted her on her behind. And there was this older lady who was in church who is no longer around, so I'm not shaming her or anything. She's already, I think, with Jesus. But she looked and said, in my day we kept that at home. And she was very upset about that. And one of the things, though, that some of the other worship team came around to say is, we just love the fact that you exhibit the fact that you like each other and love each other. And whether that was, some people might argue whether that was appropriate or not in public. It wasn't indecent. But I think it's good for us to show the world what mature, intimate sexual health looks like, and the fact that we love each other and we aren't afraid to talk about it, but we talk about it in appropriate ways.
Yeah. All right, you have any homework for us before we head off this week, Pastor Mike?
The homework for this week would be, if you're married, pick up that book.
Sheet Music,
or one of his other books. There's some other titles that might intrigue you. If you're single, pick up the book.
Okay.
If you're a parent, we'll put the link in there. And it's a whole series of books.
Sure,
I'll
for
get
different
that
ages.
for you. And I didn't want to read it because there's like 8 of them.
Sure.
So read all the titles, but we'll put those in there. And I think that will be the best resource for you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank all of you for joining us on the Grow podcast. We say it every week, but remember that growth always starts with a next step. So that next step in your faith, make sure you take it. Make sure you go check out those books Pastor Mike was talking about. And also make sure you check out the weekend teaching during this series, Bless This Mess. It's been really good. We've got a couple weeks of it left. So encourage you to join us on Sundays at one of our campuses, in person or online. Thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next week.